let me tell you about a guy named Eli Rosenbaum. Eli is someone who works for the Department of Justice. Now, he's really good at what he does. For 40 years, he has been prosecuting all sorts of Nazi war criminals. And last year, his efforts resulted in the deportation of a man by the name of Friedrich Berger, and you might be able to guess that he's German. He was 94 years old, and the old guy was really, really mad. He said, after 75 years, this is ridiculous. You're forcing me from my home. How poetic, because as a Nazi soldier, he forced prisoners on a 2-week hike through the snow, through the northern Germany, of which 80 of those people died. His neighbors in a place called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, didn't know that he was a war criminal. How would they? It's not like you have this flag out there that says, well, obviously, I belong to that team. But the thing is that God knew. In Numbers 32:23, we read this verse. It says, surely your sin will find you out. How appropriate is that for what we read this morning? Because we read in the previous chapters, in chapter 27, where Isaac is duped by his younger son Jacob, that he pretends to be Esau in order to get the blessing, but he is anything but what he seems to be. And the bottom line here that we find in this passage is that God knows, he knows everything. Jacob doesn't get away with anything. Neither do you or I. And that's good news, and that's bad news. It's never just one thing. It's sometimes good news. How could that possibly be good news? Because God sees the things that you do when no one's watching that are the right things to do. When you're doing the dishes for your family and no one sees it, God sees it. When you're doing that task for a friend or for a neighbor that seems like a thankless task, God sees that and he rewards that. He also sees the other stuff too, but I think that we're already well in tune to being scared about that sort of thing. And we don't need to talk about that too much, but we see that here in Jacob's encounters, that God knows everything, and because God knows everything, he is perfectly just. Our world right now is screaming out for justice. Are you not hearing that? Everywhere you go, they're talking about how things are unjust this way or the other. Now, as kids, or at least as a child myself, I would always proclaim, well, that's not fair. And my dad would say, you don't want fair. Fair will usually hurt a lot more. But I had this desire for justice in my life. And in many ways, I think that we should be glad that there's still that desire for justice. But we're going to talk about that in a moment. First, let's talk about why we need to know this, because God is perfectly just. Jacob doesn't get away with anything. And so what does this mean, or what does this passage teach us? Well, in order to see that, we have to look at Jacob's encounters. And these encounters with these 3 different people in this passage, primarily 3 people, there are some others as well, but these 3 primary players here, they start to show us God's nature. They start to show us that Jacob doesn't get away with anything. They start to show us that God is omniscient. Now, you remember last week we talked about how God is omnipresent, how Jacob wakes up and he has a dream and he says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it. So we see that on one side. So we see the omnipresence, but now we're going to see another aspect of who God is. And we're going to see why that's really good news, that God knows everything. So let's look at this first encounter that we find in the first 12 verses. This is with Rachel. In Rachel, in these first verses, we come to this scene where Jacob, he has left the city that he named Bethel. It was a city named Luz last week, and so he keeps walking down the road, and we read in verse 1, then Jacob went on his journey, and he goes, and what does he see? He sees shepherds. Well, so what? Well, he's a shepherd, so he understands their way of life. And so he starts to have a conversation with them. He says, hey, where are you guys from? We're from Nahor. Do you know Laban? Yes, we know him. In fact, here comes Rachel. And it seems like everything is stacking up just perfectly for Jacob right now. Because remember, he's running away from something, right? This is his chance for him to settle the score before any communication ever makes it, right? In fact, it's very unlikely that any kind of communication is going to come from Isaac, is going to come from Esau, is going to come from Rebekah, because he's all they know. What a perfect opportunity to set things straight, right? It seems like he can start a new life. Or can he? Can he start a new life, or is God going to work through these three interactions to change him? Yes is the answer, but it's going to take more than just this chapter. So here, the well scene, will Rachel be like Rebekah is the question. Remember, we had that well scene in chapter 24 of Genesis. So the servant of Abraham, he goes to the well. He finds Rebekah there. Rebekah waters the camels, right? So where are Jacob's camels? No camels. Where's the gifts that Jacob has to bring in order to find a wife from Laban's family? No gifts. You remember in chapter 24, that servant, he prays to God. He says, please, O God of Abraham, give me success in finding a spouse, finding a wife for my master's son. Is there a prayer in this? No prayer. No camels. No dowry. No prayer. Is there any waiting? Is he, remember that this man, in chapter 24, he waits to see who is going to offer to give me a drink, who is going to offer to water my camels, which was a lot of work, as we saw a few weeks ago. It was gallons after gallons after gallons after gallons, about 100 or more gallons of water going up and down into the well, up and down the steps. And we saw that Rebekah is a very strong woman. She's a woman of dignity. She's a woman of honor. She's a woman of faith. Is that the kind of woman that we see here in Rachel? We don't know. You'll never find out. Is Rachel a woman of honor? Is she a woman of dignity? Is she a woman of strength? Well, she probably is a woman of strength, because we read that she's a shepherdess. We read that she's beautiful. We read that she is Laban's daughter. We know all those things from this text. But what does Jacob end up doing? He ends up watering her livestock. Do you see how things have been flipped? He has nothing. Whereas before, his grandfather brought everything, brought all sorts of wealth and riches. That he brought spirituality into this. We don't see Jacob bringing any spirituality into this at all. And so he starts watering the livestock. But first we got to talk about this really impressive feat of strength that takes place here. He ends up saying to these men, hey, you need to get out of here. You need to go put your sheep and have your sheep do sheep stuff out in the fields, right? Why? Probably because he's wanting to be with Rachel by himself. He's wanting to, increase his chances of being able to find this wife, Rachel. Many people have surmised that might be one of the issues. Well, what does he say to these men? Why aren't you getting out of here? They're saying that the stone's too heavy. We can't move it. And that's when Jacob goes beast mode. He pulls a Hulk, and he lifts up something, a stone that is so large it would have taken 3 or 4 normal men to lift up. Remember a few weeks ago when I talked about how people like to say how Esau is this manly man and Jacob's he's this little wussy man kind of thing. And we see in this passage that why Jewish people revere Jacob. He is a man of strength. Remember, he is Esau's twin. He's just as big as Esau is. He lives a very hardy lifestyle. He is a strong man. And possibly he's 70 years old. We don't know. So he may be elderly, but he has not stopped lifting stuff. He is a, shall we say, he's a buff senior citizen. Okay, so he is the dude should be our hero. We should be saying, yeah, I want to be strong like Jacob. Why is he doing that? He's doing it to impress a woman. And so that's what he does. And so then he kisses Rachel, and it's a beautiful romantic moment, isn't it? No, don't think that. This is the Middle East. This is 4,000 years ago. Don't be thinking Hallmark film moment. This isn't the one where the wind tunnel starts blowing and she's got these tresses flowing down. No, that's not. This is the ancient Near East, guys. It's hot. She's probably sweaty and she smells. And so does he. And you know what? They don't even know it. They're not even thinking in categories of like, do I have my Menon speed stick on or not, or your Axe or whatever your deodorant of choice might be. That's not a concern whatsoever. And this kiss is not a romantic kiss. This is a family kiss. This is like a handshake in our world. He kisses her and then he cries. So he's a kissy, crying baby kind of man. No, this is a man who is showing appropriate affection to a family member. And by the way, guys, he's been running from his life. Would you be a little bit emotional? I think so. You found what you're looking for, and believe me, Rachel is everything that he's looking for. In fact, I think that he might value Rachel too much. I think when we look at this passage, we start to see that she's a bit of an idol for him. What do I mean? I don't mean the stone figurine that people would light incense in and bow down to, and not that kind of a God, but we all have them, don't we? You think that you're going to get that job. That job's going to make you perfect. That car, it's going to make your life perfect. That education, the house, whatever that status symbol is, that is the thing that you think of first thing in the morning, right? It's the thing that drives you. In fact, sometimes it may be the thing that rules you. And we see the thing that ends up ruling over Jacob is this arrangement. But we won't get that until the second section here. But she goes and she runs home. He's been so effective, she runs home. Why? She's excited. This is exciting news. Remember, 4,000 years ago, no email, no regular mail, no snail mail, no nothing. So to see an actual relative 4,000 years ago, that is the most exciting thing that has happened in this town for the last 5 to 10 years, guys. This is an amazing thing. Our cousin's home. Our cousin's home. Let's run home. Let's tell Dad. And so that's what Rachel does. She runs home and she tells Dad. So it looks like Jacob got away with it, right? I mean, he's the hero. He lifted this heavy stone that no one can lift. He's the cousin who's come from far away. They haven't seen Rebekah for so long. In fact, they never thought they'd ever see Rebekah again. And yet, Jacob shows up. He's the hero, right? Not so fast, my friends. Let's look at the second encounter. We find that in verses 13 through 27, rather. The second encounter is with Laban. And before you play that dun 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 kind of music that says that Laban shows up, it's not so obvious at first. At first, when Laban comes running, don't think it's because he thinks that he's going to get some money like he got from the servant that last time, how many ever years ago that was, 50 or so. This isn't where he's looking to get rich again. He is looking for his sister's son. This is his nephew. This is a great thing that has happened. And so Laban, he runs into the situation. And he says, it's great that you're here. Come on, come to my house. Let's stay. And Jacob stays for a month, we read about. And then in verse 14, he says something that should start to cue us in to the kind of person he is, though. What does he say in verse 14? In verse 14, as he welcomes Jacob, he says, surely you are my bone and my flesh. Well, how does that say anything? What do we know about Jacob, guys? Is he a good guy or is he a cheat, a thief, a liar, a manipulator, a con? I'm giving you a real heavy hint. Okay, what kind of person is Jacob? He's a thief. And so what is God doing here? God is putting a mirror in front of Jacob. God is saying, you haven't gotten away with anything. I want you to first see just what you are like. I'm going to put you face to face with someone who is just like you, Jacob. And though your name means thief, he can Jacob you a whole lot better than you can Jacob him ever. He will always win. He will always outcon you. He will always outplay you, outwit you, outlast you. Is that what the Survivor line was from so many years ago from that show? Outwit, outlast, outplay. He's going to be outwitted for sure by Laban. Because he makes a marriage proposal, and this marriage proposal is simply this: I will work for your youngest daughter for 7 years in order to have her hand in marriage. That seems like a pretty simple request, right? Let me dive in a little deeper on this, because I think once you start to understand what is going on here, because some people say, ooh, patriarchy. You know, they say, oh, he's buying a woman. That's not exactly what a bride price is. When you think of a bride price is really wedding insurance. Can I put it that way? Because the money that Jacob is going to provide through his labor, through his work, that's going to provide money into Laban's estate, that money was supposed to be put into essentially a trust fund for Rachel. This is not Laban's money that he's getting in these 7 years of labor. This is Rachel's money in case Jacob's an absolute doofus. In case he dies, in case he runs away, in case he gets involved in a war and gets killed. This is what a bride price is. It's not the dad's money. It's the wife's money. It's the money to keep her safe and secure. It's a term life insurance, guys. This is what we're talking about here. Now, what would be the standard term life insurance or marriage insurance rider that they'd be dealing with here? Well, usually it would be 30 shekels. It'd be 30 shekels. So what does Jacob pay here? Jacob agrees to 7 years of wages, which amounts to 70 shekels. He has zero money. All he has is his very strong self to work. And so he is saying, I will give you the equivalent of 70 shekels. I will pay you 2.3333 with a bar over it, the amount of time that, the amount of worth that she would have on the market. This is how much I esteem Rachel. So he is paying enough for 2 daughters. That's interesting. And then we see what happens. Here's where things start to get really sticky. This is where we start to see that this wedding insurance and this contract in effect, it's absolutely violated as we come to this third encounter, and that is the encounter with Leah. Now you start to see Leah comes up in verses 16 and 17. So it's not something where you have this nice, easy kind of narrative where everything is set off in nice, discrete categories. No, Laban's stuff and Leah's interaction, they're kind of overlapping, kind of like this whole thing we call life, right? It's never nice and neat and easy. But in verses 16 and 17, there's some interesting things that are said, and we already know this, right? Now, Laban had 2 daughters. That's what we call foreshadowing. Why tell me that she has 2 daughters? Well, it's gonna make sense in a little bit. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak. This does not mean that she needs bifocals or trifocals. This does not mean that she needs prism in her lenses. This does not mean that she has to have eye surgery. That's not what this means. What does it mean? Well, we're not sure exactly. So what do you do when you don't know exactly? Keep reading the verse. Keep reading the rest of the verse. What does the rest of the verse say? Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. So we know that since the word but is there, it means Leah is set up as the opposite of Rachel. Now, does this mean that Leah is beat with an ugly stick? Is that what is being said here? No. It just means that Leah's not Rachel. That's all it means. And that Rachel is the one, she is the thing that is really going to make Jacob's life complete. And Leah, no, not Leah. But I want to tell you something about Leah. Leah is really the one that Jacob needed. She's really the one who would have got Jacob. And the way that we know that is from what we read in the rest of the text. How much does Leah's dad really love her? I'll tell you how much he loves her. He loves her so much that he tricks a man into marrying her. Whew. You want to talk about some dysfunctionality? You want to talk about some counseling that's going to take? And there's all sorts of other things that we can lay at Laban's feet, and we'll get to them in due time, because this is a long story. We're not going to deal with it this morning, but see, we have 2 daughters. And Rachel, as Tim Keller said, she was the girl that no one wanted. Leah, thank you. Leah was the girl that no one wanted. Not ugly, she's just not wanted. And so what does Jacob say? He says, I want my wife. Why? Because I want to have relations with her. I'll keep it PG, guys. Okay, that's how sensitive of a guy Jacob is. But by the way, this is ancient Near Eastern. They're not going to have this Hallmark version of what a wedding is supposed to look like. What we went to yesterday when we saw Joy and Frank have their nuptials, that was great. That was wonderful for our culture. But that would not fly in an ancient Near Eastern culture. They'd be like, what's wrong with you people? You're piping in music. You've got these dresses that they don't do anything. You can't go out and do shepherding in that kind of a dress, you know? And so we don't understand you people. And yet we're the ones who say that they're messed up. And the thing is, it just depends on who you are. Well, he says, I want my wife. He simply wants to use Rachel, it seems. And Leah, she gets in the way. Leah gets in the way, and Laban, he uses that desire. And so on that wedding night, Leah, she pretends to be Rachel. Guys, does that sound like chapter 27? A sibling pretending to be another sibling before someone who cannot see them. Yes, this is exactly the same thing. And that's what Moses wants you to get. That Laban out Jacob's Jacob. He out Jacob's Jacob. Here's the mirror, guy. Here's how, and Jacob is so furious. And it's at this moment that God says, I know. And this is just a partial bit of the justice that you deserve, Jacob. Because God's not done with Jacob. See, he is going to bring Jacob to a moment and moments after having to constantly go through the humiliation to where he starts to get what humility is. Not humiliation, but he starts to understand what humility is. And that's when God's going to be able to change Jacob's name into a name that will become a country. A name that will change the world. In order to become that person that changes the world, though, you have to go through a lot of stress testing. And that's what we're seeing here, that Jacob, did he get away with it? Did he pull a fast one? He thought he did. But did he really? No. Why not? Because God is omniscient. You aren't fooling God. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you aren't fooling him. So why do we need to know this? What should we take home from this? The thing is, God knows everything, and therefore he's perfectly just. And that's what the good news of God's omniscience is that justice can exist if there is an all-knowing God. But he is the only one who can provide perfect justice. The Department of Justice and our whole justice system, when it's operating in its most pristine, perfect form, is only partial. It's only a partial justice system. And then we see and hear all of the other people who get away. So let's talk about how do we apply this text. The first thing I'd like to say is, since God is the only perfect judge, that means that we don't need to seek justice for ourselves, right? About a year ago, there was a kid by the name of Kyle Rittenhouse. Remember him? He said he was going to provide justice. 2 people died. Another one was disfigured. His life was ruined or almost ruined. Or who knows, he might become a reality TV host or something. Who knows? But he's an example of what justice does not look like. Not because of the way that the outcome of the verdict came out, because the fact of the matter is, whether he had been found guilty or been acquitted, the justice system it doesn't have a long enough shelf life. We have to look at justice in much longer terms than that. Our justice system can't provide justice because justice requires a judge who is all-knowing and eternal. Do you know anyone in a robe who meets that description? I don't, and I can't. The only one who meets that eternal kind of all-knowing, all-present, and all-loving, right? And sovereign. I don't want that kind of a judge who's a person other than Jesus. I only want that to be Jesus, because he's the judge who died for me. He's the judge who died for you. He's the judge who is all loving, and he proved it on the cross as he spread his arms wide. He's the kind of judge that we need. But here's the other thing, Christian. When we know that only God can provide justice, we can stop expecting it of others, right? Why are we shouting out, justice? I'm being oppressed. Because that's not how our earlier forebears in the Christian faith were. They were like, yeah, this isn't fair. That's what it's like. That's what Peter tells us. And in fact, God takes this injustice and he uses it to shape Jacob, and he uses it to shape us. Turn with me to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 5. Just one verse that will look as a cross-reference to see what God's doing in the life of Jacob and what he does in the life of us. Because you will have a Laban in your life, because I've had a Laban in my life. You will have someone who will come and they will absolutely grind on you. And you know why? Because there's a good and wise and holy and powerful judge in the heavens who has spoken thus. He has said that's how it's going to be. But let's look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. What should we do? Well, here's what Peter says we should do. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Let's go on one more verse because that's pretty good too. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. When we cry out oppression, when we cry out injustice, I'm sure that is one of Satan's favorite slogans. When we say, it's not fair, it's not fair. This isn't going to be one of those sermons where people are like, yeah, let's share this with everyone we know, But this is what the scriptures teach us. This is the authentic word of God that really, when you think about it through the eyes of Jesus, when he taught us this very simple rule that we've taught little kids. It's called the golden rule. Have you? It seems like people don't talk about it anymore. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How would that have changed Jacob's life? How would he have treated his father? How would he have treated his brother? How would he have treated his wife and his uncle? How would he have been different? Immensely different. But sometimes we have to learn the hard way. You have to learn that way. I have to learn that way. Jacob, he's definitely going to learn that way. And we'll see what that looks like next week when the baby wars start. Oh boy, you want to talk about something that's ugly and painful and insightful into just how hurt we are on the inside. Because Leah, folks, she's just like Jacob. She's just like you and me. She's a powerful model of what the aching in our hearts sounds like.